Dr. Brigid Burke, and a professor of mythology in the Classics and General Humanities Department of Montclair State University. Her research and writing explores the link between death beliefs in Western culture and our collective psychology of good and evil, and masculine and feminine. And today she will be talking about the winter festivals of Dionysus in the context of Greek beliefs about death and afterlife.
Good morning. My paper is entitled The Lenaia, the Winter Festival of Dionysus, in the context of Greek beliefs about death and afterlife. The Lenaia was a festival of the Greek god Dionysus connected with his birth, the first mixing of wine, and very likely his rebirth after being murdered by the Titans in Orphic myth. In Athens, this festival took place in the month of Gamelion, which is our modern January. This paper looks at the changes in the Lenaia festival when it is no longer only a rural festival, exploring the psychological impact of the movement from tribal communities to urban centers. Also discussed is the figure of the born and resurrected Dionysus as a transition figure for changing beliefs about life after death among the Greeks. The rise of Orphic belief in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE represented a movement from collective ideas about the fate of mortals entirely separate from the divine to a belief in the immortal spark in humankind that made the fate of the individual soul important, and led to later ideas linking ethical behavior with the fate of the soul after death. Concurrent with these changes was the idea that the wicked dead were punished under the earth and the righteous were lifted up to the sky, which may be reflected in later attempts in Orphic mythology to link Dionysus and Apollo. In order to put this paper in its proper context, I should note that the focus on the Lenaia and Dionysus rituals is part of a larger work exploring the relationship between afterlife beliefs and psychological associations with the archetypal feminine. Belief in an immortal soul and salvation has a paradoxically negative impact on the perceptions of the archetypal feminine in myth, religious scripture, and philosophy. This can be demonstrated using the lens of death psychology. Here I will address one aspect of this broader argument, the paradoxical role of Dionysus as a link between the collective Homeric view, slow down, okay, of life after death, sorry, and later ideas about the immortal soul and salvation. Okay, first about Dionysus. Dionysus is the Greek god of wine, also known as Bacchus in Roman myth. He is a complex character in religious mythology. There are two separate myths of his birth that lead to two different notions of his function as god. The more common story is that Dionysus is the son of the god Zeus and the mortal woman Semele. Semele is killed through the cunning of the goddess Hera, who appears to her as an old woman and tells her she must be sure that Zeus is her lover by making him appear to her as a god. Semele burns up instantly at the sight of Zeus when he grants her request, but he rescues the child Dionysus and has him sewn into his thigh until he is ready to be born. Semele is the daughter of Cadmus and Harmonia, the founders of the city of Thebes. Thus Dionysus' half-brothers are Pentheus and Labdacus, Pentheus being the Theban king of Euripides' play The Bacchae, and Labdacus the father of Laius and grandfather of Oedipus. What both half-brothers have in common is their rejection of Dionysus' authenticity as a god, with fatal results. Indeed, this cycle of myth centers on Dionysus' need to prove his authenticity as a god. Greek writings suggest that the Dionysus cult originated in Thrace, which also gives him the quality of a foreigner. It is not his semi-divine genealogy that makes them question his divinity. It is the quality of his attribution. Wine causes drunkenness, and Dionysus' rites were wild, drunken, and orgiastic. The lowest classes of society were raised up in these festivals, and it's not difficult to see why their disorderly nature is viewed as a threat. His chaotic foreign nature was respected, but as Greek society became less tribal and more urban, there was a need to tame his disorderly characteristics, which I'll discuss in the next section. There's another mythology of Dionysus associated with Orphism and the mystery cults. Orphism is a branch of Greek religion that believed mortals had some kind of divine soul, had to live a pure life, and would face reward or punishment in death. While worship of Dionysus can be traced at least as far back as the Minoans, there's no evidence for Orphism earlier than the 5th century BCE. Orphism seems to be a combination of Zoroastrian and perhaps Egyptian thought, as well as early philosophy, including Pythagorean teachings. This syncretism has led Radcliffe Edmonds to suggest that the term Orphism is a bit like our modern use of the term New Age, to describe a set of beliefs that come from a variety of belief systems without any real central doctrine or organization. In the Orphic mythology, Dionysus is the son of Zeus and the underworld queen Persephone. He is the divine child who will succeed Zeus as ruler of the cosmos. The Titans become jealous of Dionysus. They lure him away from his caretakers with toys, then kill him, cook him, and eat him. The goddess Athena manages to rescue his heart, and from this she and Zeus resurrect him. To punish the Titans, Zeus strikes them with a thunderbolt and reduces them to ashes. Out of the ashes, humans are formed. Yet thus, humans have a wicked nature inherited from the Titans, but they also have a spark of divinity from the ingested Dionysus. Skip over that part.
You've got extra time.
I do? Okay.
Yeah, and just make sure you keep it as
Okay. Am I still talking too fast?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I will I'll slow down.
Take your time. You've got plenty of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so let me go back. So thus humans have a wicked nature inherited from the Titans, but also have a spark of divinity from the ingested Dionysus. Plato may be referencing this myth when he speaks of the Titans of story who are said to have reverted to their original state, dragging out a painful existence with never any rest from woe. Edmund suggests this is not a reference to the Orphic myth, but to the evil of the Titans, who felt that they were beyond the gods. But Edmonds also cites Olympiodorus, who claims that man has a dual nature, Dionysiac, which is good or divine, and Titanic, which is evil. Whatever the case, it's clear that there is an interpretation of Titanic nature as somehow lesser or evil. Titan comes from the word for clay, and this part is similar conceptually to the Genesis 1 myth in which Yahweh makes Adam out of clay, emphasizing the earthly and mortal nature of the body. If anything, the Orphic myth is more Gnostic in character, and humans are meant to recognize their greater divine nature. This is the first mythical formulation of the concept of the immortal soul in Near Eastern religious thought outside of Egypt, and likely the beginning of the moral and ethical component of religion. This Orphic Dionysus is the chief god of the mystery cults, who are concerned with living a pure life so that they may be rewarded in the afterlife through reincarnation. The Bacchic gold tablets discovered in Greek cemeteries from the 4th century BCE and later suggest that there were certain spells or formulae taught to initiates, which were carved on tablets. These tablets were hung around the necks of the initiates after death. The spells ensured that the soul of the deceased would end up in a less gloomy part of the underworld. This idea bears a notable resemblance to Egyptian afterlife beliefs and funerary practices, in which certain magical spells written on the tomb walls allowed the deceased to pass safely to the realm of the sun god. Dionysus was the only god in Greek mythology that the worshipper could experience imminently. While most of the gods were remote and could only be petitioned or appeased with sacrifices, the Dionysus worshipper could be possessed by the god during rituals by drinking wine. This immediate experience of divine ecstasy of the god is likely the reason Dionysus becomes associated with mystical religion, focused less on social rules and more on the immediate experience of the divine. Walter Burke connects the notion of theos with Dionysus, a word that has its roots in the idea of divine ecstasy. Now on to the Lenaia itself. The Greeks had several festivals dedicated to Dionysus by the 5th century BC. There was the rural Dionysia, celebrated in areas outside of Athens, the Lenaia, the Anthesteria, and the city Dionysia. These festivals took place between December and May, and were connected to the harvesting of grapes and the first pressings of wine. Greek dramatists and poets competed at the Dionysus festivals. Even though the plays usually had little to do with Dionysus himself, they were a traditional part of his festivities. The main dramatic festival in Athens was the city Dionysia. The Lenaia functioned as a kind of dress rehearsal for the main event, and was the only festival in which foreigners or non-citizens were allowed to act. Only citizens could participate in the city Dionysia. The origin and purpose of the Lenaia festival is shrouded in mystery. It was an ancient festival of the Ionian Greeks, who represented the main ethnic group of Athens. It took place during the Attic month of Gamelion, which means marriage, roughly equivalent to mid-January on our Gregorian calendar. To quote Ian's story in Arlene Allen, "We know little about the purpose and rituals of the Lenaia. Mystical elements have been suggested, a celebration of the birth of Dionysus, or the ritual of the sparagmos, which is the eating of the raw flesh of prey. A parade on this occasion is attested with jokes from the wagons, that is, insults directed at the spectators, and a general Dionysiac sense of abandonment." Julius Wertheim cites a mystical aspect of the Lenaia from the writings of Pliny and Pausanias, the changing of water into wine inside the temple of Dionysus. He quotes Pliny, "On Andros, wine flows from the source of Dionysus on 7 days consecrated to the god. If this liquid be taken outside the temple, it changes into water." We will never know if there was any truth to this claim, or some causal explanation. However, it's reminiscent of another episode, the wedding feast of Cana, at Cana in the Bible. In John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11, the evangelist describes Jesus' first miracle, which is the turning of water into wine. Wertheim suggests this is probably the Dionysus tradition at work. The miracle of the wine is not the only similarity between Dionysus and Jesus. As I noted earlier, the Orphic mythology of Dionysus makes him a kind of divine son and savior figure of humanity, as the divine spark in humans is what allows them potential immortality or reward for death. Dionysus is called son of Semele in the songs of the Lenaia, referencing a non-Orphic mythology of the god. However, Radcliffe Edmonds believes there's a connection between the myth of dismembering Dionysus and the first pressing of the wine celebrated at the Lenaia. To quote, and here he quotes from a scholast to Clement of Alexandria, who explains the Lenaia festival as having to do with the dismemberment of Dionysus. They refer to the Lenaizontas, which is a rustic song sung at the wine trough, and it itself has to do with the dismembering of Dionysus. They don't give me all the lyrics here, but they talk about, the scholars talks about them binding up with ivy and breaking up with the grapes and pressing the wine, which Edmonds interprets as the connection between the dismembered Dionysus and the trampling of grapes to make the wine harvest. To quote him again, while the Lenaia does not coincide with the grape harvest, the word Lenaeos means the trough or vat in which the grapes are pressed for wine, while the Lenae seem to have been the women celebrating the Dionysiac rituals as Bacchic Maenads, Maenads being the wild followers of Dionysus. However, as the references to the son of Semele may suggest, the Orphic component of the ritual might be a later addition to an older ritual. There are no writings before the 5th century to offer definite evidence one way or the other. Nonetheless, the Orphic component seems credible for the classical era, and is even likely as Orphic thought became more common in Greek philosophy and religion. When the festivals became part of city life, the organized cycle of Dionysus rituals was promoted by the Athenian tyrants, who ruled from about the mid-540s to 510 BCE. This was a political move as they sought to promote a kind of national unity between Athens and the outlying areas. The two main features of the official Athenian festivals were the reenactment of the myth of Dionysus as he moved from his temple site in the Eleutherae to northern Attica and Athens, and also the performance of plays. Dramas written and performed at these festivals tended to contain more political criticism and satire due to the loose nature of Dionysus worship. The Lenaia rites were handled by what they call the Archon Basilius, a priest figure who took over the religious duties of the king, while other Dionysus festivals were handled by the Archon Eponymous, the magistrate who had more political role. The secular and political aspects of the city Dionysia, as well as its exclusion of foreigners, suggests an attempt to co-opt the Dionysus rituals in order to bring their disorderly and chthonic aspects into a more civilized intellectual venue. This is my last part. From Dionysus to Apollo, the impact of Dionysian beliefs. From a psychological perspective, the Dionysus rituals offered an outlet for the chaotic and animalistic parts of the human psyche, a means of confronting the other within ourselves, as well as fear of death. However, the official Dionysus rites shift their focus over time, as the local rituals become state rituals. The Lenaia festival appears to have been a sacred rite of the Ionians, with likely connections to the Orphic mythology of Dionysus, as well as the miraculous changing of water into wine. When it becomes part of Athenian ritual, the performance of plays is central, and the Lenaia becomes a lesser festival compared to the city Dionysia. Dionysus' association with drama seems more appropriate to Apollo in this context, who is the god of poetry and music. Orphism is the connection between these two very different deities. William Guthrie and Keith Chambers theorize that any human who may have been the basis for the mythical founder Orpheus may have been a priest of Apollo. They further suggest that Orpheus, who was very Apollonian in nature, with his disposition and gift as a musician, may have taken over and modified the rites of Dionysus to make them more palatable to civilized Greeks. We don't know if this is true. However, it makes psychological sense for the Apollonian hero to encounter the wild foreigner Dionysus and incorporate his rites meaningfully into Greek consciousness. Dionysus is functionally a chthonic god. He is associated with the fruits of the earth, and he is a bringer of madness, representing the dark places of the mind. As I noted earlier, he is also associated with direct mystical experience and divine ecstasy. Hence, Dionysus is not only chthonic, but individual. He represents the personal and direct connection to the god, as opposed to the supplication of distant Olympians or denizens of Hades. The Orphic myth connects Dionysus to Zeus as appointed successor of king of the gods. The Titans are treated as evildoers interfering with the plan of Zeus, who takes on the role of creator. In the Odes of Horus, published about 23 BCE, there's a hymn to Bacchus that clearly mixes the legends of Bacchus with Apollo, and their references to Augustus. What we see in Greek and later Roman writings is the recasting of Dionysus in the light of the masculine sun god. His chthonic and foreign tendencies tend to diminish in the public sphere. The differences between the rural Lenaia and later festivals follow this pattern. Dionysus is the best example from the classical era of a deity whose associations change from chthonic to celestial, as Dionysus eventually takes the goddess Hestia's place on Mount Olympus. It has the negative effect of watering down or sanitizing the reality of the archetype represented by Dionysus, and sets the stage for repression and demonizing of our known naturally chaotic instincts. This is a natural consequence of taking private ritual and making it public. The larger the group, the greater the attempt to contain these shadowy aspects of the rites in the name of law and order. On the positive side, it still represents some kind of outlet for the darker side of human nature in a relatively safe environment. The mystery rites address the ultimate fear of what will happen to us after death. Death anxiety and the fascination with this less civilized part of ourselves may have contributed to the popularity of the Dionysus cult right up until Christian times. To quote Carl Jung, the Dionysian element has to do with the emotions and affects which have found no suitable religious outlets in the predominantly Apollonian cult and ethos of Christianity. The medieval carnivals and jeux de paume in the church were abolished relatively early. Consequently, the carnival became secularized, and with it divine intoxication vanished from the sacred precincts. Intoxication, that most direct form of possession, turned away from the gods and enveloped the human world with its exuberance and pathos. The pagan religions met this danger by giving drunken ecstasy a place within their cult. Heraclitus doubtless saw what was at the back of it when he said, "But Hades is that same Dionysus, in whose honor they go mad and keep the feast of the vat." For this very reason, orgies were granted religious license, so as to exorcise the danger that threatened from Hades. Our solution, however, has served to throw the gates of hell wide open. Walter Burke notes that the antithesis between Dionysus and Apollo, used by Friedrich Nietzsche as the essence of Greek history and art. To quote him, "There, Apollo and Dionysus are not only brothers, but they also have other gods beside them. Nevertheless, the two are set in relation to each other. Several black-figured vases place Apollo on one side and Dionysus on the other. Our civilized deities also have a chaotic polar antithesis. If there's a light, there must also be a shadow, in a literal sense and a figurative Jungian sense. Jung says above that our solution throws open the gates of hell. What he means is that by disavowing our psychological shadow, it becomes unconscious. We then project shadow onto others, resulting in a demonization of the other. Dionysus reminds us that the other is also ourselves. In conclusion, the complex figure of Dionysus is pivotal in representing a shift in thinking about death and the soul in his role as the Orphic savior figure. The frenzied rites of the wine god take on a more civilized air when they become a unifying part of state ritual. Dionysus takes on characteristics more akin to Apollo and even becomes an Olympian. This is concurrent with the beginnings of morality and ethics in religious thinking and concern for the fate of the individual soul. Thank you.